Please turn to page 223. The title of this chapter is Mentor Text to the Writing Anchor Charts. This is probably one of my favorite activities, and what it basically is it's bridging reading to writing, as well as providing students with visual charts that they would use while they're writing to pull words and phrases into their own planners. So, reading, we are going to pull words and phrases from our reading and put it on our writing anchor charts, or from different activities that we're doing in class, like for instance, movie scripts or lecture notes. We can also take words and phrases and put them on our writing anchor charts. The whole point of these charts is to connect reading and language to writing and to access those words and phrases from reading and language quickly when we're planning our writing and we're writing out our sentences, our stories, our information. So these charts need to be available and visually for the children so that they can actually pull words and phrases. Let's look at all the different types of charts that you can use. On page 224, this is a personal narrative chart for students to record their ideas. So what I mean by that is this. Many times when students are asked to write a personal narrative, which is a true story about myself, about themselves, so they're going to use the word I, and it needs to be memorable. So a personal narrative is a true story in which I write about myself because it's something that happened to me that was memorable. And memorable means something made me really happy, so now I'm going to tell the story about what made me happy. Or something made me sad, or angry, or scared, or I felt silly or embarrassed. Because I felt that way, it's memorable and it's a story that I can tell you. So there's a true story about myself that's memorable. So why is this an anchor chart? Well, so many times when students need to write a personal narrative or go to write a personal narrative, they don't have any ideas. They can't think of what to write about. So what I like to do is I like to have a chart, notice where I have different emotions on the top. Underneath, like for instance, happy here, I have different words for happy: joyful, excited, ecstatic, merry. I have different synonyms for the word happy. And then I have icons or quick pictures and key words of different events that happened that made me happy or that made them happy. This is a brainstorming anchor chart where we're actually, whenever we come up with ideas, we can put them up on this chart. How I present this chart to the students is this. When we're writing many personal narratives, I show them our chart with all the different emotions. We talk about how a personal narrative is we show the letter T, true story about myself, that's memorable. And we make it like our heart is pumping. And then I show them the different faces. Memorable means when something makes you happy or sad or embarrassed or scared or proud. After I have the emotions up there, I show them different things that I told them that happened to me. And I may just make this up, but at least it gives them ideas. Like for instance, I got a present that made me happy, and I'm going to tell you the story about that present. Or I lost my tooth, or I got to order anything on the menu. Or something that made me mad. My brother ate my candy bar. Or something that made me feel embarrassed. I fell in front of everybody. Or I wore pajamas, or I dressed up on dress-up day and it was the wrong day. Or maybe something scared me, like a big wild dog or a storm. These are different ideas that I can show students. Now, notice on the bottom of this chart, there's a little post-it. That's what students will add. Once I show students how this chart works and I show a few of my ideas, then what I do is I leave post-its by the chart. Whenever they have something to tell me that's memorable, which is usually not during writing time. Have you ever noticed that? At the beginning of the school day, they come in and they want to tell you something that happened to them. After a weekend or before a weekend's going to start, they're going to tell you something that's going to be exciting to them, that will create a memorable event. Well, what I like to do is I like for children to draw a quick picture and write their name. Because many times I may not have time to listen to them at the beginning of the day to hear their story. So we can take that story, put it on a Post-it. When we go to write, students then can use this brainstorm board to come up with ideas that they can write about. Or if we're doing a whole group personal narrative where we're going to use one story in order to learn how to write a personal narrative, they could go back, look at the different ideas posted on the chart, and then we could say, you know what, let's use Ralph's story to write our personal narrative so we can practice how it works. Ralph, tell us your story about how your dog had puppies. We listen to the story, and now we'll use that to write our personal narrative. Or a student will look at the different ideas on the chart for them to come up with a story on their own for a personal narrative. This is a lovely way to record different ideas when students are ready to share those ideas or think of them. And then later during writing lessons, you can retrieve those ideas from this board. That's our personal narrative idea anchor chart. On page 225 are our sentence anchor charts. The first one is an anchor chart that you can use in order to help students come up with a story opening. Now this chart has the when strip of paper, a where strip of paper, who strip of paper with a T chart that shows people or animals, and then an action strip of paper. And what it basically is after we finish reading a story, we can draw, and I usually just select different students, I give them a piece of paper, and they draw a quick picture to represent that part of the story. So for instance, if we just read a story and it happened one day, I may give a student a piece of paper and they go draw a sun, and then we put it under the when. And maybe the story happened in the ocean, so now they go and draw a picture of an ocean. I'll give a piece of paper to a student to do that. For the who was the story mostly about, or who were the different characters in our story? So now the students can draw a picture. For instance, this was a girl, this was a dad. Over here we had a pig, we had a bird, we have different animals that we read about, and we just record them up on our who chart. I like to give a piece of paper to different students, so it's more of a student-created chart. They will go and draw a picture and we'll put it up on the chart. The actions show the different beginning actions, like they were jumping or they were swimming or they were climbing, and that way we have visuals of different actions that the character was doing at the beginning of the story. This is a lovely visual chart that we can actually use when we want to create our own story sentences. I need a character. Well, let's look at the characters that's on our who strip. Do we want a person, an animal? Let's look at some of the ideas there. I want my character doing something. Let's look at some of the ideas on our action strip. When and where should my story be happening? Let's look at some of the ideas on our when and where strip. These are great activities that you can do to connect your reading to your writing, and notice how this is set up with when, where, who, action, so that it actually can form a sentence, and kids can retrieve this information in the exact order that they would be forming their sentence. It's a lovely visual chart. Again, I like to build it as we're reading stories. We put the when, where, the setting, character, and action information up on these charts. So this chart builds as the year goes on. Below that chart is the transition chart. I love this transition chart. This is more for first grade. I'm not going to do this chart for kindergarten because it's a little too advanced for kindergartners to go and look in categories for words for transitions in their sentences. This is a wonderful chart for first graders to use to sort their transitions in their sentences. This transition chart is for when transitions, where transitions, and sound effects, which are typically transitions that you would see many times in stories. I like to use this transition chart for our story transitions. So when we are writing stories, we have this transition chart near us as we're getting into the actions, actions, actions. As we're transitioning from one action to the next, we can go up to these charts and find words that we can use to help transition to the next action in our story. How did we collect these words? These different transitions were taken from movie scripts and then put up on this wall. We also did transition hunts. After we finished reading a focus story, a story that we've been reading all week long, we go back and we hunt through the different pages looking for transitions an author used. We write them on strips of paper and then we put them up on our transition wall. Again, going from mentor text, what we're reading, or from oral language, our movie scripts, to these anchor walls. And then these anchor walls are set up so that when we're writing, I need a transition. Well, there's my transition wall. What kind of transition, a when, where, or sound effect would be best to transition into this sentence? And then we have our words to select from. So this wall would be empty at the beginning of the year, and we would slowly build it as kids read these words or also use them in their oral language. On page 226 are the describing characters anchor charts. And we tell the children typically who's in our story, a person or an animal. So we can draw a person right in the middle of a chart and then a pretend animal right in the middle of another chart. I like to go back and I like to label the parts of a person. What would we describe on a person? And then that can be your nouns. So you could have the word eyes, you could have the words hair, you could have the words lips, nose, legs, arms, skin, body. And then as the year goes on, you keep adding descriptive words that would describe those parts of that person's body. So that when we go into a story and we want to describe something on the character using the 5 senses, we have these words here. So what do I need to describe on the character? Their hair. It's important for the reader to see it. Oh, what kind of hair do they have if they're hot? Stringy. The stringy hair, their stringy hair. So now we have a way to retrieve descriptive language, which we would be adding to this chart. Where do we get the descriptive language? From our reading, from our oral language, from our movie scripts. The same goes for our animals. We would go through and we would add our parts of our animal. So we would have things like the tail, or we would have things like legs or claws, their nose, their eyes, their body. So when we'd have their body, what kind of skin do they have? What kind of feathers do they have? Scales, fur. Now what you'll see is what they learn about different body coverings. We can actually put those body coverings on this page and then have descriptive language to match. What a wonderful activity for students to use to connect their reading to their writing using that adjective type of search in their reading. If I was reading about all the different coverings of animals and we read about feathers on an animal or fur, we could go back in the text and find describing words and record them on our wall.